Hello and welcome. Today we are talking about powders. So I do have an older video where I went through a whole bunch of different powders. We did demos and, kind of talked a little bit about details for each of those. And this is the updated version. We've had a ton of powders come out this year. So I have pressed and loosed. I mean, honestly, it's crazy how many powders I have. So we're going to go through each of them. We'll take a look at, how many grams you get per dollar and so forth, and do a little bit of a breakdown. And at the end, I'm going to tell you which ones are my personal favorites. Now, I do want to start off by mentioning the Sisley Blur Expert Powder. And I wear shade 0 light, but it does come in another shade, the original shade, which is a bit darker. And I did not include this in the video for a reason. This to me is a powder primer. So what I like to do with this is I will take a dense buffing brush. So something like a Kabuki, the Sunyoji, Master Face or Buffer Pro, or, something like that. And I will buff that in. I'll put on my liquid primer first if I want, or sometimes that just start off with a powder. Then I put my foundation on top. And what it does is it really helps kind of blur out pores and things like that. So this to me is more of a powder primer, which is why it was not included with the powders here in this video. So we've got pressed powders, we have loose powders. Pressed powders are going to be your more expensive powders. Loose powders typically have a better price point per gram. They can also be a little bit messier. They're definitely not really something you want to carry in your purse, but they can be a great addition to your makeup arsenal at home. As for application of powders, I personally prefer to use brushes, and I like light, airy brushes. This is one that I really love. This is one I use today. This is the iHodo. This is a paddle-shaped brush, and I have the goldfish on it from a couple of years ago, but they have it out now with a geisha on it. So anything light and fluffy and soft is what I like to use to apply my powders, but if you want more coverage, you might want to consider a denser brush or perhaps a puff. So for today's demos, I did, I have one powder on each side of the cheek. You'll see that as we get started, but I start off with a brush layer so you can see what it looks like with the type of application I would use. And then I also do go in with a puff over that so you can see a heavier application, which with some powders that works out really well. With others, it can be a little bit too much. So you kind of want to, see what it is you're looking for. It's also going to depend on your skin type and so forth as well. If you have very dry skin, you might want to press a little bit of powder in with a puff so you're not aggravating any dry skin. Or if you have dry skin, for some people, it is better to go in with the softest, airiest brush and just a very light layer. It really kind of depends on what you're going for and what your skin looks like with brightness and dullness and the products you're using as well. All right, so we're going to start off with the pressed powders. Now, with pressed powders, recently we've seen a lot of refillable options. So as we do go down and break down the prices, I will be sharing, if there is a refill available, I'll give you the refill breakdown as well as with the case. So we're going to start off with Koh Gen Do. And this is the current Koh Gen Do pressed powder. You can see we have one side that is lavender and one side that's white. You can use these separately. Sometimes what I will do is I'll use a little bit of the white to tap underneath my eye just for setting, a concealer, and then maybe use the purple, or usually I'll just use it all mixed together with a brush to set my makeup. And then the other powder we're going to be taking a look at from Koh Gen Do is the Brightening Moisture Powder. And I believe this has been discontinued. I haven't seen an official notice that's been discontinued, but it's been out of stock for so long. So I don't think it's coming back. I think this is going to be the only powder now that is pressed from Koh Gen Do. And this one, it used to come in two shades, the Blurring Beige, which is this one here, or a pink. The pink one's been gone for a long time. And so we're going to take a look at these, but I included this because I think it's a great powder. You might not be able to buy it now, but if you already have it, hopefully this will help you see how the new one compares on the skin. So let's take a look at the demos. Now, the new pressed powder retails for $114 US with the case. If you are purchasing just the refill, it's $96 US. So we do have 12 grams of product, which is a fair amount of product in there. The new packaging, it does have a click closure and there is a mirror in there, and it does come with a puff. So the powder is made in Japan. If you purchase it with a case, it brings it down to $9.50 per gram. If you are purchasing just the refill, it's $8 per gram. And according to Koh Gen Do, it says set and refresh, designed to glide on the skin effortlessly. The powder leaves your complexion hydrated, translucent, and with a glowing skin-like finish. There are 7 different powder technologies that have come together to create a radiant 3D effect, while skincare-driven ingredients provide smooth, luminous, long wear. The powder's unique light effect conceals pores and fine lines while controlling oil and perspiration for a soft-focused, shine-free look that gets even better as the day evolves. It's cruelty-free, paraben-free, artificial color-free, synthetic fragrance-free, and mineral oil-free. Now, what I love about this powder is I do agree that it looks better as the day goes on. As some of your natural oils come through, or you're outside in the humidity or something, the powder really melts into your skin, so you get a little bit of that radiance from there, but there's no shine, there's no glitter, and it's still a matte look. It's just a luminous matte, and I think it's a really beautiful finish, and you really don't need much. So again, I like to use this one with a light, fluffy brush, and you can use this for setting, or you could use a very light dusting for finishing. I typically use this for setting, which in my opinion, the majority of the powders featured here today are ideal for setting and not so much for finishing. Some of the more radiant powders that we'll look at today are good for finishing powders. And that's typically, one way to categorize them is by your finish on there. As for the brightening moisture powder, this, again, as I mentioned, I do believe it's been discontinued, and it retailed for $85 US previously. We had 9 grams of product. So it actually came out to be $9.44 per gram, which is just slightly less than the new powder is with a case because it is a smaller amount. This is described as a translucent brightening powder with an exquisite silky finish that transforms dull-looking skin to a brighter, beautiful, radiant finish. Mineral powders are infused with 10 moisture-retaining botanical emollients, hyaluronate, and ceramides for a beautiful long wear. Diamond powders added for that exquisite radiance to finish off your makeup in a perfect soft veil of light, and it creates blurring perfection to conceal lines and pores. And just like the other powder, it has the same exclusions: paraben-free, artificial color-free, synthetic fragrance-free, and so forth. This has been one of my favorite powders for years. I absolutely love it. I have this one and the pink one, but the blurring beige shade has been my favorite. It's a beautiful, perfected powder. To me, the biggest difference between the new powder and this older version is one, color, but 2, the biggest difference is the actual formula itself. You can see when you're putting on the older Koh Gen Do, it's a little bit more of a velvety texture. It's a little bit of a looser powder as well. The new one is a little bit more firmly pressed, so less product comes up at one time. So you really only need a minimal amount, and that's what you're getting originally. So, it's a little bit, you don't have to worry about picking up too much excess, in my opinion. Because of that, I do feel like the brightening moisture powder, if you do go in with too much on your skin, you're going to get more of a powdery texture. Regardless, it looks like a velvety powder on your skin. It will sink in, but it doesn't sink in and look as perfected as the new version does to me. And I really feel like they took the technology from this powder and they improved upon it in the new version. We'll go ahead and swatch these on my arm, but honestly, I don't think you're really gonna be able to tell much from the arm swatches, but sometimes just seeing the hue in a little bit more of a finger swatch can kind of help make a decision. So this is the new powder and the old powder, and you can see how much more powdery the old one is, and you can see it's kind of a warmer beige shade. So a little bit different, but this new one is pretty translucent, but it has a brightening effect. And I do think on deeper skin tones, I'm honestly not sure if you would see any of that white radiance from there. You might. So that is something to note. Next, we're taking a look at the YSL All Hours powder. And this came out this year. It does come in a variety of shades. And we do have, this lifts up, and then it comes with a sponge. So you can actually, again, because this comes in shades, you can use this in place of foundation, or you can use it as a setting powder. But let's just go ahead and swatch these now. And this one here is shade 1. So you can see that this shade is going to be similar to the Koh Gen Do, but the actual formula is a little bit silkier, thinner texture like the new Koh Gen Do. And then we also have the Sisley in number 1, Rosy. And you can see that this has been a favorite powder of mine for years. And again, this one comes in different shades as well. I love to use this with a brush, which is why you can see like the finish on here. You can see a little bit, it looks a little pebbly. That's just from my bristles. So yeah, it's a great powder. Let's take a look at the details. The YSL All Hours Hyper Finish Setting Powder retails for $65 US. So as I mentioned, it does come in 7 different shades. We have 8.5 grams of product, which brings it to $7.65 per gram. This is made in France, and we have a 2-year shelf life. This is a matte finishing powder and a multi-use setting powder. So you can definitely dust this on as a finishing powder if you would like more of a matte look. Again, we do have 7 shades, so you could use this in place of foundation. Use that sponge that it comes with to get a bit more coverage and have just kind of a lighter powder foundation with this as well. This is skin blurring. It sweeps shine, sets foundation, blurs imperfections, resists sweat, and it's a super soft and breathable finishing powder that blurs imperfections and pores while smoothing skin and setting foundation, with a finely milled texture to seamlessly glide over bare skin and foundation. It's never cakey or creasy. It's powered by skincare actives. This mess-free pressed powder leaves skin looking blurred and mattified. Overall, I think this is a nice pressed powder, and if there's a shade in here and you're looking for something that's perhaps a powder that's closer to your skin tone, this might be a good option to check out their shade range. As for the Sisley, this comes in 4 different shades. I have shade number 1, Rosy. This is called the Fido Poudre Compact. It retails for $130 US, and we have 12 grams of product, which brings it down to $10.83 per gram. It's made in Italy and has a 3-year shelf life. This is ultra soft and creamy. It instantly blends into the skin for a soothing sensation and a velvety feel. No powdery finish, imperceptible on the skin. Exceptionally smoothing, it blurs wrinkles and fine lines while adhering perfectly to the skin for improved hold, buildable coverage, and it comes with a puff. So you can definitely get more coverage with the puff, as you can see in these demos. Again, this is one that I personally have used for setting powder for years, and I like to use a light fluffy brush. It is a favorite of mine. Personally, I feel like when I use a puff with the Sisley or the YSL, I feel like they're a little bit heavy looking on the skin. Now, I have pretty much balanced skin, but this time of year it leans a bit dry. So if you have an oilier skin type than I do, you might like it with the puff, but for me, I think it looks a little bit dry. It's not my favorite. So I do think going in with a lighter layer with these is best. Next, we have 2 new releases. We have the Cle de Peau pressed powder that came out this year. So this is a new pressed powder from them. And this is our only shade here. You can see that this is going to be a warm ivory. Look how much warmer that is than the original Koh Gen Do. And then we have Burberry, which does come in different shades. And you can isolate the powder, the one in the center at least. This is really, the white square is a great translucent setting powder. So sometimes I'll use just this and tap it under my eyes with a finger to set concealer. But I'm going to swatch this, kind of blend it together, because I think that's going to be the most commonly used way. And you can see that it is going to be a little bit, this one here is shade 1, but this one, it's a little bit lighter than the Cle de Peau, slightly, a little bit warmer, but they're pretty similar in tone. Now, the two powders here, this really feels just like a very thin, you know, kind of just like a silk powder. And then the beige portion here feels a little bit creamier. Let's look at the details for these. The Cle de Peau Refining Pressed Powder retails for $115 US if you purchase the case. So it has 5 grams of product, and that brings it down to $23 per gram with the case. If you're purchasing just the refill, it's $85 for the refill, which brings it to $17 per gram. And this is made in Japan. It has a 2-year shelf life. According to Cle de Peau, it's a refillable pressed powder that sets makeup with a fine, translucent matte finish. Instantly refreshed for a soft, radiant, just applied look that lasts all day with hydrating treatment benefits. Minimizes the appearance of pores and smooths roughness while helping to absorb excess oil without creasing, dullness, or shine. Maintains optimal moisture and balance with hybrid skincare and makeup ingredients. I think this is a great powder. This one just came out this year. One of the great things about this, if you are into touching up your powder throughout the day, this is one that does touch-ups really well. Sometimes when you go in with a powder and you touch up on an area where perhaps some oil has broken through or something like that, or, you know, sunscreen application, sometimes you can end up with a little bit of a cakey mess when you touch up with powder, or it just looks very powdery. This powder, I think, if you like touch-ups, I think this is the best powder for that. It really sinks in, looks natural, looks freshly applied, never looks cakey or greasy or anything. So, you know, I think it's really beautiful, particularly for touch-ups. The Burberry Beyond Wear Setting and Refining Powder retails for $58 US, and we have 11 grams of product. So that's actually a pretty good deal for this one. So it's $5.27 per gram. It's made in Italy, and we have a 2-year shelf life. As I mentioned, we do have 4 different shades, and Burberry, before we would only be able to purchase it directly from the Burberry website, certain things would be on Selfridges, but Nordstrom is now carrying Burberry. They've just started, so this is another option if you are looking at trying some Burberry makeup items. According to Burberry, this powder is infused with natural origin ingredients. It's non-drying, lightweight, and breathable. The formula provides a 24-hour mattifying veil with active protection. It's a hybrid of tinted setting powder and translucent refining powder that blurs imperfections. There are ultra-thin powders with buildable coverage, skin-protecting ingredients, and it's vegan. This is another great option that has released this year, and I think this is a really beautiful powder. I like the fact that we do have some different shade options for this, and overall I think it's a really nice option, and you know, it's a little bit more cost effective than some of the others that we have seen so far. Our next 2 powders, we're going to be taking a look at the Hermes. This is the Plein Air in number 1 Nuage. So this came out a year or 2 ago, and you can see it is a nice silky white setting powder, and it's very thin. It actually does a great job for setting. So it's great for setting. It's not going to do too much else, but it really adds a nice silky veil to the skin. Then a new powder that has come out this year is the Prada Reset Powder. So this is green, but it doesn't really look green on your skin. It will help a little bit with some color correction. You know, the green will help neutralize some red, but it's not that evident on the skin. This is going to be a pretty translucent green, so you don't really have to worry about getting a green cast on the skin. And you might have been able to tell when I swiped that, this is a pretty creamy powder. So let's take a look at these details. The Hermes powder retails for $97 US with the case, but this one does offer a refill for $63 US. So we have 6.5 grams of product. That brings it down to $14.92 per gram with a case, or $9.69 per gram with the refill. It's made in Italy with a 1-year shelf life. It says, beauty embraces the open air with Radiant Matte Powder, a soft, silky finishing powder that mattifies the complexion with a translucent glow. Universal shade contains emollients for long-lasting softness and comfort. can be used to mattify skin, set makeup, or touch up during the day. Now, they do mention in here that this is a finishing powder. To me, a finishing powder is something you dust on after everything to kind of give more of a veil. Usually there's something that's going to be a little bit more shimmery, something like the Guerlain Meteorites, which I did not include here today. But to me, this is really more of a setting powder. You could dust this on lightly as a finishing powder, but I feel like it does better as a setting powder. It sets makeup very nicely. And as I mentioned, it gives you this really nice, soft, matte veil on the skin. So I think it's a really beautiful powder, and it's very lightweight, so it doesn't look powdery on the skin, which is great. The Prada Reset Rebalancing Refillable Setting Powder has a very long name, but it retails for $90 US with the case, or $60 US just for the refill. So we have 6.8 grams of product. So that brings it to $13.24 per gram with the case, or $8.82 per gram for the refill. This is made in France with a 2-year shelf life. This is a setting powder that extends the wear of makeup and delivers an instant mattified soft focus effect on skin while controlling shine all day. Infused with plant-derived squalane, this mattifying makeup setting powder makes the skin feel fresh, comforted, and moisturized over time. Its universal green shade applies sheer on the skin and does not leave a white cast or ashy finish. So I think that's one of the great things about this shade. The green shade really does work well on a variety of skin tones. You don't get that white cast. You don't really get a greenish cast with this either. You get a slight bit of color correction, but honestly, it's not noticeable. What is noticeable is the creamy texture of this. If you were to go in with a puff or a sponge with this, you could definitely get a fuller coverage, a little bit more blurring. This is one you could definitely use for setting, and you could use it for finishing with a light dusting, but again, I think this really excels with setting your base products here. And I actually really like this one a lot. I think it's a really nice formula. So I think they did a nice job with this one. Next, I wanted to include a few classics. We have the Gucci powder, and I have shade 00, but it actually comes in a wide variety of shades. So you could definitely get this in a shade that is closer to your skin tone. You can see shade 00 is going to be your translucent shade. So this is kind of like a drier cream powder type texture to it. And then we also have the Charlotte Tilbury. This is the Flawless Filter, or Flawless Finish rather, powder. And I have shade 1 Fair. And you can see that's going to be a little bit warmer. Overall, you can see the majority of these powders all have the same color. And let's take a look at the details here. The Gucci Matte Beauty Powder retails for $65 US. We have 10 grams of product, which brings it to $6.50 per gram. It's made in Italy with a 1-year shelf life. This is a buildable face powder. So as I mentioned, we do have a variety of shades, so you can use this in place of foundation as well. It offers a lightweight, visibly smooth texture to create a naturally perfected complexion. Micro-reflecting lamellar powders provide a smooth application for a luminous complexion. Emollient agents provide a silky, comfortable feel all day long. When used alone, it creates a unified, naturally perfected complexion. On top of foundation, it sets makeup perfectly with a smooth, comfortable, natural matte finish. And it does come with a microfiber sponge. If you're using it in place of foundation, I would definitely recommend using the sponge. You can even dampen that a little bit and get a little bit more coverage in areas. And I think it's a nice application that way. Personally, I like this one more so as again, a setting powder. But I do think this is a nice powder on the skin. Like all Gucci products, you can smell a fragrance with this. So just something to note there. The Charlotte Tilbury Airbrush Flawless Finish powder comes in a variety of shades as well. And we actually have different size options here. So this comes at $48 for the regular full size product, but they also sell a mini for $28 US and a refill of the full size for $41 US. So the full size is 8 grams, which brings it down to $16 per gram. If you're buying the refill, it's $5.13 per gram. The mini has 3.4 grams of product, So that actually comes to $8.24 per gram. Now, depending on what size you get, if you purchase the full size, it comes to $6 per gram or $5.13 per gram for just the refill. The mini, however, has 3.4 grams of product, so that comes to $8.24 per gram. The powder's made in Italy and we have a 30-month shelf life. This is a microfine powder. It gives you an immaculate complexion and doesn't cake or sit in fine lines. This is a classic for a reason. It's a really beautiful powder. There are rose wax and almond oil inside. It hydrates and smooths skin. It's ideal for long-lasting complexion or a perfecting finishing touch. It's vegan, gluten-free, cruelty-free, and there's less than 1% synthetic fragrance. Overall, I think this is a nice basic setting powder. Next, let's take a look at the Dolce & Gabbana. This is the Fig Skin Perfector. I had heard so many great things, but let me just show you here. You can see that this is going to be a very thin, light, kind of like a creamy powder kind of texture. And you can see there is some radiance with this. So if you go in with a brush, you're really not going to pick up a ton. This powder is a little bit better with either you're going to need a dense buffing brush or a sponge or puff with this to get more of that product. We're also taking a look at the Addiction Tokyo Silky Blur setting powder. And this one here comes in one shade, which is Natural Beige. And this is a very thin powder. If you're somebody who doesn't really like powders and you just need something to help mattify a little bit, the Addiction Tokyo powders are kind of, that's it. This is powder for non-powder people. So we're going to take a look at these. But we're also going to go right into the other Addiction Tokyo powders. So these are the refills. And I do actually have a case for one of them, but I haven't put them in the case. I've just been keeping them in here. So it comes out of here and there's a sticker on the back. You pull this off to stick it into the refill. So they're not magnetic, they are plastic. But we do have a couple of the other powders here. So this is the translucent pink in number 2. And this is translucent glow. So these two powders here are going to be the glow version, whereas this Addiction Tokyo's are matte one. And these are going to be the glow. So you can see there's a little bit of luminosity with it, a little bit more sheen to it that gets picked up. Now, just like the Fig, this is a very thin, silky powder, so you're not going to pick up a ton with a brush with any of these powders. So we're pairing these together. Let's take a look at these. The Dolce & Gabbana Fig Skin Perfector retails for $52 US. We have 6.5 grams of product, which brings it to $8 per gram. It's made in Italy with an 18-month shelf life. This is a blurring powder that controls shine for up to 12 hours while providing a pore minimizing effect. The Sensorial Perfector comes in a universal shade that leaves no white cast on any skin tone, making it suitable for all as a perfect finishing touch for a luminous complexion, and it's vegan. Now, personally, I think because of the formula of this powder, I think you want to go in, if you're using a brush, you need something a little bit more dense for this. And I think this one works best if you buff this into the skin. So you can buff it in as a setting or a finishing powder here, but it does give a little luminosity. So this is one that really could be used more as a finishing powder. And you do want to buff it in. So it kind of depends what product you have underneath. You want to make sure those aren't going to move around. But I think this one excels more as a finishing powder than as a setting powder. As for the Addiction Tokyo Silky Blur Setting Powder, this one comes in only one shade. We have number 1, Natural Beige. The product is $45 US with a case or $37 US for the refill. It's made in Italy. This has 6.5 grams of product, so that brings it to $6.92 per gram with the case or $5.69 per gram for just the refill. This is a blurring powder that evens skin tone for a hydrating and smooth complexion with a matte finish. A long-lasting formula that sets makeup and prevents shine. So although this has a very thin, silky texture, it doesn't feel like necessarily you're picking up a bunch with your finger. You really actually only need a light dusting of powder with this. It does come up pretty easily with the brush. And you know, it's, again, all of these Addiction Tokyo pressed powders are powder for non-powder people. People who do like powders will also like these powders, but what I mean is it doesn't look like powder on the skin. It gives you the results, either the matte like this powder or the glow with the other two. And, you know, it doesn't look like powder though. So I think that's the best thing about them. The technology with these powders really just sinks into the skin beautifully. As for the Addiction Tokyo Skin Reflex Setting Powders, this one we have in 2 different shades, and these are going to be the ones that have a little bit more luminosity to them. So we have 2 shades. Number 1, Translucent Glow, is a transparent, shiny golden beige for warm and neutral undertones. Number 2, Translucent Pink, is a transparent silver pink for cool, neutral undertones. Just like the matte powder, it's $45 with the case or $37 for just the refill. Again, we have 6.5 grams of product, brings it to $6.92 per gram with the case or $5.69 per gram for just the refill. And it's made in Italy, which is actually pretty interesting because everything else from Addiction Tokyo is made in Japan. This is a transparent setting powder that blends into your skin and reflects light, giving it a natural glow and 3-dimensional look. Long-lasting formula that sets makeup, leaving smooth skin that is clear, powder-free, and glossy. And that basically sums it up. It kind of gives you a little bit of that glossy luminosity to your skin. There's no real sheen, there's no shimmer or anything, but it does just look fresh. You know, it doesn't look wet, it looks fresh. And I personally really love these. So I think they are great products. And again, if you don't like powders, this would be where I would start. Our last 2 pressed powders are Westman Atelier, and I have 2 shades in it. So we're just gonna compare these side by side. And this is the shade Creme. And I have to say, when these first came out, I absolutely loved these and I used them all the time, but I don't actually reach for these too much anymore. So I do like them still, but there have just been others that I have been using more. So that's Creme, and this one here is Bubble, which is a light pink. And typically I would use Creme all over my face and Bubble under my eyes. Let's take a look at these. The Westman Atelier Vital Press Skincare Powder retails for $75. We have 5 grams of product, which brings it to $15 per gram. And their tagline is, "Works like makeup, acts like skincare." We have 5 different shades. It's antioxidant rich, potency packed, and it's described as a real life filter for your skin. It's micro milled skincare ingredients that over time will improve your skin texture. It's made in Japan. We have a 1-year shelf life. It's ultra sheer and feathery light. This powder instantly smooths pores, evens tone, sweeps away shine. A skin defense shield complex made with vitamin C and probiotics shields from free radicals while protecting from blue light. Over time, pressed in actives help to control sebum and refine skin texture. Overall, I think this is a really beautiful powder. I like it a lot. I like it, again, with more of your brush finish, but as new powders have come out, I have found others that I tend to prefer more. This has a pretty hefty price tag. So let's take a look at all of our powders on a cost comparison. So I'm just going to run through the list here. I have 2 lists. So I made a list of, the least cost per gram to the most with the cases. And then those that have refills, we took the refills into account as well. So 2 different lists. We're going to start off with those with cases. So if you're buying everything full price as is, the least expensive powder is the Burberry at $5.27 per gram, followed by Charlotte Tilbury at $6 per gram, Gucci $6.50, Addiction Tokyo, all of those are $6.92 per gram. The YSL is $7.65 per gram. Dolce & Gabbana, $8. The old Koh Gen Do, the brightening moisture powder, was at $9.44. The new one is $9.50 with the case. The Sisley powder is $10.83 per gram. Prada, $13.24 per gram. Hermes, $14.92 per gram. Westman Atelier, $15 per gram. And Cle de Peau, $23 per gram. So we have quite a range from $5 to $23 per gram when you buy the packaging. Now the refills will kind of change some of the rankings, some of the levels here for some of these powders, but not as drastically as you might think. So you can see our pressed powders are definitely going to be more expensive than our loose powders. So we'll be coming up to those in just a minute. As for those with refills, so what I did was, if there's a refill available, I use the refill price. If there is no refill available, I use the full purchase price because it's the only way you can buy it. So it's basically what your cheapest option is. So in that case, our least expensive is the Charlotte Tilbury refill for $5.13 per gram. Next up, we're still at Burberry in number 2 for $5.27 per gram. Addiction Tokyo is in third place, $5.69 per gram for any of those 3 powders. Gucci comes in at $6.50. YSL, $7.65. Then we have a tie between the Dolce & Gabbana and the new Koh Gen Do at $8 per gram. The Prada comes in at $8.82, which I have to say the Prada was a bit closer to with the case at $13.24. So it was closer to the higher end. Here it's kind of in the middle of the pack. So that one did kind of change in rankings quite a bit. After that, we have the Koh Gen Do Old Brightening Moisture Powder at $9.44. It did not come with refills. And then the Hermes at $9.69. Sisley, $10.83. Westman Atelier, $15. And the Cle de Peau at $17 per gram. So you can see we definitely have some changes in ranking. As for my personal favorites for the pressed powders, stay tuned to the end. We'll get to that. Let's move on to our loose powders. Now, as we're looking at the loose powders, I'm not going to go ahead and swatch each of these. I feel like with the pressed powders, the importance of seeing an arm swatch is mostly to get a better idea of the formula. You can see a little bit more of the texture. With the loose powders, they're all going to swatch pretty much the same because the loose powders all have kind of the same texture to them, aside from the hydro powders. So we're not going to be swatching them, but I am going to show you the packaging for each of them. We're going to start off with the Givenchy powders. So this is the old one. This was one of the limited edition tops that I put on the original in number 1 Mousseline Pastel. So it's a square case, but we have the round circle here. It does come with a puff, and we have the 4 correcting shades here. The new one, I only have this one in a mini, but you can see the corners are slightly more rounded. We don't have the trim around the edge in the new ones. And these, again, we have the 4 shades. This is an example of the little puff. And, you know, we've talked about these powders kind of ad nauseum, but let's take a look at these one more time. So in my opinion, having the square cap with the round screw portion inside, it can be a bit messy to close. Sometimes I have a hard time getting the lid on properly. So that's just a personal preference. I don't love that personally. The new powder is the one we're going to focus on here. The old one had 12 grams of product. The new full size has 10 grams of product. It does retail for $60 US, or you can purchase the mini like I have here, and that is $31 US. The mini size has 3 grams of product. These are made in Italy, and we have a 1-year shelf life. So let's take a look at the full size here. This actually brings it to $6 per gram, whereas the mini is $7.75 per gram. This new powder features prismatic light technology to set makeup and illuminate skin. Long-wearing, waterproof, weightless formula with 2 colors for correction and 2 for radiance. It can be used as a setting powder or a finishing powder. Now, in my opinion, these new powders, you know, there are certain shades that are going to be more matte than others, where some of them are pretty shimmery. The shade number 1 is one of the more matte ones, but if you move on to a few of the others, you're going to see a lot more shimmer. And in my opinion, those ones there are really going to be best for finishing. This one here, because it does still have a little bit of that shimmering luminosity to it, I prefer to use it for a finishing powder, but it's not a favorite of mine personally. So the old powder I feel like had a different purpose. This is still a nice powder, but it has a different audience in my opinion. So if you have drier skin, you're looking for a little luminosity, you know, these new ones might be a better formula for you than the previous version. Next, let's take a look at the Anna Sweed. This is the water powder. And I love this. This is a hydro powder. It does come with a puff, which I actually used in the demo, so you can see. Our holes on here, though, are fairly large. So just something to note that, you know, it's a pretty, not a fine sifter. And then we're also going to take a look at the SUQQU. Now, the SUQQU, notice this is not flat. This is a bit curved. So depending on how you store or where you store your powders, that might be something you need to take into consideration. Notice it's pretty large and it comes with a huge puff. So this is the puff it comes with, and we have a fine mesh sifter here. And this is actually a light pink shade, whereas the Anna Sweed is going to be a lavender. So let's look at them. The Anna Sweed powder is limited edition, but they do bring it back every year. It retails for $40 US. I purchased mine from Beautylish, but Anna Sweed's direct website also sells to the US. So we have 6 grams of product, brings it down to $6.67 per gram, and it's made in Japan. This is a cooling powder, and it leaves your skin feeling weightless with a silky porcelain finish. Keeps your skin moisturized while repelling water and sweat. The water powder will smooth and blur any unevenness, leaving the skin silky smooth. This powder will last you through long days in summer heat, cooling your skin while keeping it absent from fine lines and pores. And I love it. It's a nice light blurring powder. The lavender shade is a bit brightening. I do have a video featuring this and comparing it to some other lavender powders. So if you're interested in different shades and how this shade has changed over time, definitely check that one out. But I think this is a beautiful powder. And if you like those moisture powders, this is one of my personal favorites. As for the SUQQU loose powder, this retails for different prices depending on where you're purchasing it, whether you're going from Selfridges, Cult Beauty, Harrods, or Liberty. So I found that Liberty had the most consistent pricing at $77 US. And so we're going to go based off of that pricing. For example, it's $89.70 at Cult Beauty right now. So depending on where you're purchasing can make a big difference in the price, as well as what your shipping costs might be. So Liberty, I felt like, was the most accurate representation. This has 20 grams of product, so at the $77 price, that brings it down to $3.85 per gram. It's made in Japan with a 1-year shelf life. This is a smoothing loose powder suitable for all skin types. The translucent veil, both smooth and light, is like a fine feathery cloak. It is enriched with pearlescent pigments and amino acid-based powders that effortlessly blend to give a translucent finish. Designed to enhance your skin's radiance and clarity, no matter your skin type, you can kiss goodbye to the look of dullness. And the light pink shade doesn't look pink on your skin. It doesn't leave any cast, but it does add a little bit of brightening, a little rosiness to it. It just makes things look a little fresher. This is actually one of my go-to loose powders, and I would highly recommend this one. I think it's a really great loose powder, as you can see in the demo. All right, next we're gonna be taking a look at the Tarte powder. This is actually intended for under eyes. So it does come with a little triangle eye puff here, and it has this little lid here, and then we have a fine micro mesh. So I did put it on the face here in case you are interested in using it that way, but this powder really is ideal more for under eyes. So this is the Tarte powder, and I have the lavender shade. We're going to compare this directly to the new Addiction Tokyo Lilac Glow loose powder. And this comes with a puff. Again, we have a micro mesh strainer here, or sifter. And then while we're looking at the Addiction Tokyo, might as well look at the other 2 shades as well. I purchased all 3 of these. So we have number 1, Soft Glow, which is a beige. And then we have number 2, which is Luminous Pink. So think of these as the loose powder versions of the pressed glow powders we looked at. So the Lilac Glow is kind of new. There is no pressed version of this. So let's take a look at all of these on the skin. Now the Tarte Creaseless Setting and Brightening Powder retails for $36 US. It gives you 7 grams of product, which comes to $5.14 per gram. There are 7 shades. It's made in Italy with a 1-year shelf life. Again, this is specifically made for under eye, but it could be one you might want to use on your face at some time. You know, maybe you're traveling, you just want to take one, or perhaps it's just easier to just get one powder out. Let's face it, sometimes you just don't want to take out a lot of products. So this is a loose setting powder for a natural brightened under eye. Say goodbye to chalky vibes and creasy lines. Non-drying feeling formula means you'll feel nothing but comfort, even as it works overtime to control the look of shine. It's sweat proof up to 16 hours. I think this is a great powder, and it does come in different shades. I have heard that some of the shades have some shimmer to them. This one here that I have does not. It's not shimmery. I don't see any glitter in it. So just something to note though, if you are looking at some of the other shades, you might want to see if you can find these in person. As for the Addiction Tokyo powders, these are the Invisible Essence Loose Powder Glow Plus formula. They retail for $39 US. We have 5 grams of product, which brings it to $7.80 per gram, and they are made in Japan. As I mentioned, we have 3 shades. The first one we're looking at is the Lilac Glow, which is number 3. But then we'll follow that up with number 1, Soft Glow, which is our beige, and number 2, Luminous Pink. Now, the powder formula is the same for all 3 shades. It's a loose powder with a nuanced color that provides a moisturized, luxurious look for a flawless finish. It gives you a long-lasting, fresh glow that enhances your skin's natural beauty. I think this is a really beautiful loose setting powder. It's one that I personally really enjoy. And I love how they have the pressed formula for the Soft Glow and the Luminous Pink. I'd love to see that Lilac Glow in the pressed formula as well. So overall, a really nice loose powder that gives you a little bit of a luminous matte sort of finish without any shimmer or shine. Now we have another Addiction Tokyo loose powder to look at, and you can see that this time we have frosted plastic here. This is our matte powder. So this comes in a beige shade. Again, we have the puff. This is shade number 1, translucent. And again, just like with the pressed powder, this is essentially your loose version of the matte pressed powder. And we're going to compare this one to the Sisley. This is the Fido Pudra Libra powder, so our loose powder. And I have shade number 3, Rose Orient. So we have a mirror up here. It does come with a puff. This is actually one of those silicone cupcake liners that I cut down to prevent the powder from kind of getting all over, because you can see we do have larger sifter here, like the Anna Sweet. It's about the same size. There is quite a bit of powder in here. So let's take a look at these two and see how they compare on the skin. Now our Addiction Tokyo Invisible Essence Loose Powder in Translucent Plus retails for $39 US. We have 5 grams of product, which brings it to $7.80 per gram, and it's made in Japan. So it's exact same specs as the Glow versions we just looked at. This is a loose powder that settles softly on the skin with a barely there effect. It melts into the skin like an essence, creating a silky smooth finish. The long-lasting powder enhances your skin, subtly transforming a fresh face or an avant-garde masterpiece. Now, as I mentioned, the pressed powders from Addiction Tokyo, those are really powders for people who don't like powders. They don't look like powder at all on your skin. That's not true of the loose powders. The loose powders are more of your traditional powder. They do sort of melt into your skin, but they're not going to be as invisible on the skin as the pressed powder. So just something to note there. As for the Sisley, this loose powder, it's a Sisley Fido Pudra Libra. I have shade number 3, Rose Orient. It retails for $115 US, but we have 12 grams of product. So it comes down to $9.58 per gram. There are 4 different shades. It's made in Italy with a 2-year shelf life. This is an airy powder that's exceptionally fine and light as a veil. It creates a perfecting halo that gives radiance and sets makeup. It glides over the face like a second skin for a perfectly natural, imperceptible result. It unifies and mattifies the complexion for a smooth and refined appearance to the skin. I think this is a beautiful loose powder, and it's really nice for a setting powder with a light dusting with a brush. So overall, this is a really nice powder as well. And moving on, let's take a look at a couple that have a little bit more luminosity. In this case, we're taking a look at the RMS and the Sweed powders. So the RMS I have in shade light. So you can see we do have this little plastic lid here, and this lifts up, and our sifter is actually the RMS logo, which personally I find a little bit of a pain to get the product through that. It's not my preference. And then we have Sweed. And this is going to be in shade 00 Fair. You can see it is a little deep for what I would expect for a fair shade. It does work for me, but just something to know, if you're more fair than I am, this one might be a little bit deeper than you expect. Let's take a look at these on the skin. Now, both of these powders are going to have a bit more luminosity. The RMS is a Hydra setting powder. There are 3 shades. It retails for $42 US. We have 10 grams of product, which brings it to $4.20 per gram. It's made in Italy with a 1-year shelf life. This powder visibly reduces shine for 8 hours. It's a long-wearing, talc-free, skincare-infused loose setting powder available in 3 sheer, soft focus shades. This weightless, oil-absorbing powder minimizes the appearance of pores, blurs imperfections, sets makeup, and delicately hydrates for a natural, smooth filter effect on the skin. Silky texture that won't cake or settle into fine lines, providing the finishing touch for filter-like skin without flashback. Overall, I think the RMS is a beautiful, subtly luminous powder on the skin. This is one that I really like. You can use this for setting, but actually because of a bit of luminosity in here, I do prefer this one for a finishing powder. So I think it's a really beautiful, soft finishing powder. As for the Sweed, our Sweed is called the Miracle Powder, and you can actually use this as a mineral foundation. So I have shade 00 Fair. It comes in 7 shades. It retails for $45 US. We have 7 grams of product, bringing it to $6.43 per gram. It's made in Korea with a 1-year shelf life. This vegan miracle mineral powder foundation works like a magic filter on the skin. It gives a second skin feeling with a blur effect and natural glow. The formula is clean, free from talc and bismuth oxychloride, and will let your skin breathe all day without clogging. It's rich in antioxidants, minerals, and infused with vitamin C. You can use it directly on the skin or on top of your foundation. So I like this one, dust it very lightly as a finishing powder on top for a subtle luminosity, but I do occasionally wear this as a powder foundation. If you are using this as a powder foundation, please note there is a definite luminosity that shows up a bit more. So during the summer when you want kind of that dewier, fresh face look, this is a nice powder to do that, and it really does help absorb oil throughout the day. So that's typically when I'll use it that way. The rest of the year, if I want a little bit of glow, something kind of like the Guerlain meteorites without using those, I think the Sweed powder, lightly dust it with a brush, gives a similar finish to the Guerlain meteorites. I wouldn't say they're exactly the same, but you can get kind of that same shimmery radiance from that. Now, one of this year's most highly anticipated powders was the new Guerlain loose powder. This is a Peru Gold Skin Diamond Micro Powder. Honestly, I wish some of these brands would have shorter names, but this is a gigantic loose powder here. And we have a nice huge puff. We have a traditional plastic sifter here. And then we're going to take a look at this in comparison to the new Decorte powder. And this comes in 2 shades. So I have shade number 7, which is our snow shade, nude matte snow. But there's also number 6, nude matte beige. So it comes with a puff. You can see that our sifter here is actually in the Decorte logo here, their little symbol here. But what I like about this versus the RMS is it's got some wider portions. So I do find it's easier to get the powder out of this one versus the RMS personally. So let's take a look at these. The Guerlain Peru Gold Skin Diamond Micro Powder retails for $95 US. But we have 35 grams of product. So this is our biggest loose powder that we're looking at today. Now, it might surprise you, but this brings it down to $2.71 per gram, which is significantly less than what we've been looking at before. It's kind of like buying in bulk. This is made in France with a 1-year shelf life. We have 4 different shades. There's a soft, light texture infused with pure 24 karat gold and diamond powder. It sets makeup, blurs and brightens the complexion with an ultra sheer finish. Instantly smoothed and more even, the complexion appears rejuvenated. The cornerstone of the formula, the powders, are coated in oil for a feeling of absolute comfort for 24 hours. I think this is a really beautiful powder. It does have a fragrance, so I don't use it as much as I would otherwise. I feel like Guerlain products in particular have become a little bit more stronger in the fragrance department over the past year than they used to be. So There is definitely a fragrance here, but I love the way that these melt into your skin. If you were a fan of the SUQQU melting powder blushes, they use that same formula with the oil coated powders and so forth, and they would melt into your skin. That does the same thing here. So this is one of those powders that actually looks better after it sits on your skin for a few minutes than it does initially. So after like 10 minutes of being on your skin, it really melts in and looks beautiful. So I think this is a really beautiful option. The Decorte translucent loose setting powder, as I mentioned, comes in 2 shades. We have shade 6, nude matte beige, or 7, which I have here, nude matte snow. It retails for $50 US. We have 20 grams of product, and this comes to $2.50 per gram, so even less than the Guerlain here. It's made in Japan and has a 1-year shelf life. This is described as a lightweight, ultra-fine, silky face powder that blends effortlessly for a long-lasting, radiant matte finish. Infused with skin-caring ingredients to help ensure lasting, non-drying comfort throughout the day, skin feels naked and looks luminous with a veil of light. I think this is a really beautiful powder. You could use this one for setting or finishing. It really kind of doubles well in either area. So I think this is just kind of a nice basic all-around powder. It's one that I really like. Next, we're taking a look at the Mario loose powder and the RCMA, which is a classic, a staple of so many people for years. So the Mario, this is the Surreal Skin Soft Blur Setting Powder. Comes in a variety of shades, but I have number 1, Fair Pink. And you can see that we do have a larger sifter here. And there is a puff that is sold that's pretty expensive in my opinion. So I would go with a less expensive puff personally. Then we have the RCMA. And this is the original no color powder. And this is the container it comes in. I use a little plate to dish this into. You could work it into the lid, but honestly, it's small, so it's hard. And we have kind of more of a medium-sized plastic sifter here. Now, I did the pricing of this one based off of purchasing one of these. However, they do come in duos or triples as well, which can give you additional cost savings. Let's take a look at the details. The Mario Surreal Skin Soft Blur Setting Powder retails for $38 US. We have 15 grams of product, bringing it to $2.53 per gram. There are 7 different shades. It's made in the US with an 18-month shelf life. It's a talc-free, pro-performance loose powder that sets makeup up to 12 hours, blurs and smooths the complexion with a natural finish and all-day shine control. It has light diffusing spherical powders and smoothing amino acids to help blur lines and pores. There is no flashback. I think this is a really great loose setting powder. I really like it. You know, it's a nice mattifying powder. It does what it says it's going to. It never looks heavy or powdery. It's just a great basic powder. So I think this is a really nice option. And I love the fact that there are other shades to look at as well. The RCMA No Color Powder. This is as simple as it gets. We have 2 ingredients, talc and silica. That's it. Retails for $14 US, but as I mentioned, you can buy this in duos or triples to get additional cost savings. But we have 85 grams of product in one jar. 85. That's a ton. So that brings it down to 16 cents per gram. Not dollars, 16 cents. So this is definitely your most cost-effective powder out of anything we're looking at today. It's made in the US. We have a 2-year shelf life. And it says, set your makeup like the pros with this cult classic invisible setting powder. Used on set by Hollywood makeup artists for years, RCMA No Color Powder sweeps seamlessly over skin, locking in a soft focus finish that stays comfortably matte all day. Pigment-free formula blends smoothly over all skin tones and makeup products without altering color or texture. I have to say, if you're looking for a mattifying powder and you don't care whether talc is in it or not, this is probably the best powder you can get. It just gives you a nice light matte veil, doesn't really do too much else. It's a nice basic setting powder, doesn't change your color. You know, it works on everyone. It's cost effective. So if you don't care about talc being in the ingredients, it's a fantastic option. All right, and last up, we're taking a look at the Rodial Glass Powder and the Jones Road. So the Rodial, we have your traditional plastic sifter. It's gonna be on the larger side there. And then Jones Road, I actually really like the packaging on this. It does come in a variety of shades, but you can see that we can turn this so we can either unlock our holes in the sifter or keep it completely closed. So I think that's a nice feature. And let's look at these on the skin. The Rodial glass powder retails for $59 US. 18 grams of product brings it to $3.28 per gram. It's made in Italy with an 18-month shelf life. It's a vegan powder and says this weightless velvet soft powder is a game changer in the quest for a flawless, poreless skin. Utilizing glass microsphere innovation, it's blended with subtle pigments with a soft peach undertone to scatter ambient light across skin and to work wonders on reducing dullness, imperfections, and poor appearance with a barely there finish. I have to say, this is one of my favorite loose powders. I really do like the way this one looks on the skin. Rodial, you know, it's not necessarily everywhere, so I feel like it's a bit underrated. We don't see it as much. We don't hear much about it, but this is a really great powder. And I know they do have, or they used to have, a pressed form of this. I've never tried it, but I love the loose one. It's one that I used exclusively for like a straight year. It's a really good loose powder. The Jones Road Tinted Face Powder retails for $28 US. We have 6.5 grams of product, bringing it to $4.31 per gram. There are 8 different shades. According to Jones Road, this is powder reinvented. It is a finely milled, ultra lightweight setting powder designed to seamlessly blend into your skin to set your foundation, color correct where needed, and minimize shine without looking like you're wearing powder. For me, this is a nice basic setting powder. It sets it does fine. So it's a pretty basic powder. I think it does a nice job setting your makeup. If you are somebody who does have oily skin, this might not hold up all day though. So it kind of depends on your skin type here, but it does mattify nicely and it gives you a nice soft veil of a matte finish. So overall, I think it's a nice product and I do really like the packaging on here. So let's go ahead and take a look at our cost ratios here. Now our loose powders, we haven't seen refills for these yet, so we just have one list. Our least expensive is definitely the RCMA. I mean, you can't beat this at 16 cents per gram. I mean, can you imagine what that would be getting it on sale or buying like a triple set? So it's definitely cost effective. Next up at $2.50 per gram, we have the Decorte powder, followed by the Makeup by Mario at $2.53 per gram. Next up, which might be a bit surprising, is Guerlain at $2.71 per gram. I don't think, at least I know I don't, I never think of Guerlain as being on the lower end of the cost spectrum. So this is one place where it actually is. And then we have the Rodial at $3.28 per gram, followed by the SUQQU at $3.85 per gram. Then Hermes, $4.20. Jones Road, $4.31. The Tarte, $5.14. Then we have the new full-size Givenchy at $6 per gram. The Sweed is $6.43 per gram. Sweed, $6.67. The mini Givenchy is $7.75. And all of the Addiction Tokyo loose powders, the matte and the glow formulas, are $7.80 per gram, which is actually our second most expensive. And the most expensive is the Sisley at $9.58 per gram. But you can see that in general, all of these, you know, are significantly less than the pressed powders. Our least expensive pressed powder was the Burberry at $5.27. And we kind of just go to our most expensive loose powder is Sisley at $9.58, which is right in the middle of the list of pressed powders. So, you know, I'm saying dollar-wise. The Sisley, however, is a little bit past the midpoint in the press. It's a little bit more on the expensive side. So just some things to note there to kind of keep things in perspective. So I hope that was helpful. Let's take a quick look at my favorites. So it's really hard to come up with favorites. I do like to use different powders at different times of year or with different foundations and things like that. I feel like powders are like skincare and you kind of have to do whatever your skin's asking for that day. However, I have a hard 3 for press favorites. So my very number one favorite is the new Koh Gen Do pressed powder, followed by the Sisley, which has been a favorite of mine for years, and the Addiction Tokyo, particularly the translucent pink and the glow formula. So those are my top 3 pressed powders. And again, if you don't like powders and you don't like that powdery look, the Addiction Tokyo is where I would take a look. And then I feel like we've got some great honorable mentions. You know, some of the powders that came out this year were really great. The new Prada, the Cle de Peau, the Burberry, and the Hermes Nuage, actually. All of those are kind of tied for next place for me. So those kind of all tie for fourth place, but those first three, those are like a hard three. I absolutely love those. As for loose, I feel like it's much harder to pick favorites. A lot of them seem more similar on the skin than you might expect. I feel like there are fewer differences than there are with the pressed powders. So my number one favorite loose powder, it's a SUQQU. So I love this shade here. It's just kind of like a nice light pink shade here. And I think it just does a nice job of brightening without looking pink or rosy, because I have enough redness in my skin. I don't need that. But I think it just gives a really beautiful, soft, luminous matte veil to the skin. So following that, I'd go with the Addiction Tokyo. And then I think the Anna Sui, the RCMA, the Rodial, and even the Guerlain, aside from the fragrance there, that's kind of why it's not higher on the list. I would have loved to include the Guerlain. Honestly, the fragrance is a little bit much for me, so I don't really reach for it. If it didn't have the fragrance though, it definitely would have been up there in my top three actually for loose powders. So my top three would have been SUQQU, Addiction Tokyo, and Guerlain. But because of the fragrance, we're leaving it as a top two with the SUQQU and Addiction Tokyo. And then the Anna Sui, RCMA, and Rodial kind of all tied for third. They have different finishes, but I think they're all equally lovely on the skin. So I hope this has been helpful. Please let me know your thoughts. Definitely share your favorite powders down below, and let's help everybody out so everybody can find the powder that works for them. So thank you so much for tuning in, and I hope you have a wonderful day. Thanks again for watching.